Well, actually, I was born in Queens, but I grew up in New Hyde Park, which is sort of half of New Hyde Park is Queens and half of it is Long Island. And it really did impact my filmmaking yeah, for a number of reasons. One is because I went here, I went to LIU to film school. And you know, it makes a nice difference when you're in an environment. This campus is huge. You know, there are many great places to shoot on campus. And so when we were film students here, we would do all kinds of different locations. You know, I remember shooting one of my projects in the lower level of that, you know, the building that's right to the side of theater. It's an old, like, it used to be a greenhouse or something. And anyway, so I shot one of my films in the basement of that. You know, it's kind of a big, fun laboratory here. Well, when I was at school, I actually did more narrative work than plain documentary work. I did some of both. But I did more narrative. Once I got out of school and when I was in the city in the early 80s, I was living in the village and the HIV/AIDS crisis was just starting. And actually at that point, they hadn't even discovered HIV, so it was still AIDS, this mysterious killer that was killing all my friends. And so, or a lot of people I knew were getting sick. And so I started looking at ways, and we weren't getting any news about it in the media. So I started looking at ways to get the word out. And what else was happening at that time in the 80s was that desktop video had become a real thing. When I was in undergraduate school here, the cameras for video that we had were huge, and they had these big long cords, and the recorder actually didn't even have a cassette. It had rolls of video, magnetic videotape. It was very big, it was very bulky. It wasn't, and it didn't look that great. So, you know, at that point in time, I wasn't that interested. But when desktop video came along and small cameras gave you a decent image, and you could edit these images easily, I started to put everything together. There's a crisis. There's a political crisis. We need to get the word out. I make videos. I'm going to start making, getting the word out. And what's the quickest way to do it? It's video, not film, because film you have to send it to the lab, you're going to get it developed, you have to cut it and then do a sound mix and everything. With video, it's very immediate.
See, when we were in control, things went well. When we lost control was afterwards, when the media got control of the event and we lost our representation. Up until then, we'd been representing ourselves. I was in on the organizing, I was documenting it, so we had control of our image. The next day at WOR was exactly the opposite.
So that's how it sort of all came together. Well, I got involved with gay men's health crisis before testing the limits, and I went to work at GMHC because at that time in New York, they're the oldest AIDS organization. They were the only game in town when I first started wanting to volunteer. And through GMHC, when I was there, I started a cable television show called Living with AIDS, which was basically hosted by a person living with AIDS, and it was all about, you know, issues, how to get treatment, how to deal with the stigma. It was doing the things that mainstream television should have been doing at the time, but they wouldn't touch it because there was just too much discrimination, homophobia, racism, sexism, you name it. It was preventing society from just taking a look at the fact that people were getting sick and dying. And it had to, you know, they had to come up with a response, just like they did in times of polio, when the government just, you know, marshaled resources and came up with a cure. So while I was at GMHC, I met the Testing the Limits people. It was right around the time that AIDS activism was born. And that was a little bit different, where GMHC was volunteering and bringing meals to people and helping them run errands, do their laundry. ACT UP was more political activism, where we were in the street doing protests. And so at that point, the videos became more of, they were more for advocacy. They were like maybe videos you see in the street from various protests. It was more really vital activism. And we were all, you have to remember, most of the people doing it were about your age. So there was a lot of energy, and we brought our own sensibility, and we made projects that appealed to a wider audience. And so people began to learn more about AIDS because they liked to watch our videos because they were cool. So it was a great experience, really.
What's going on here today?
Well, the reason we're here is that Hearst Corporation owns Cosmopolitan Magazine, and Cosmo just ran probably one of the worst AIDS articles on women, which basically says that if you're a heterosexual woman, even if you're sleeping with a guy who's infected, you're safe, you're not at risk.
Say no to Cosmo! Say no to Cosmo! Say no to Cosmo!
I began thinking of ways to make it apparent to the viewer that what the issues were. And to do that, I felt like we really needed to confront Gould. We needed to go and sit down with the little monster and find out exactly, one by one, each issue he had presented that was putting women in peril.
I started making the film, I very well knew that Larry could end up hating me. We weren't close friends when I started. I mean, I knew him and I respected him. I knew him for a long time because I had been at GMHC since the mid-'80s, and he goes back way before that. So we just, I don't know, we got along. We never really had a fight. We were always very cordial. There were times when, you know, part of it was that he was very sick for a lot of the filming, and in a way that made it easier because, not that it was easy that he was sick, but it was like we weren't sort of arguing about where I was going to shoot or anything. There was only one option for me to shoot, and that was in the hospital. I felt really great about it getting the nomination because I have been involved with the history of documenting the AIDS crisis in New York for many years. And I worked very hard to make sure that the history in Larry Kramer in Love and Anger is accurate. And it is. And so I really was proud that we were up for Best Historical Documentary because I felt that this was a history that was told by insiders. I'm working on a project right now on Esther Newton, who is a cultural anthropologist who basically was one of the founders in this country of LGBT studies. And now so many colleges have LGBT studies programs. So this is, she set this up in the 70s when it was so hard to do. So I'm really into historical documentaries in a way, because I think the history can be fun. When you see images, like when you see images from the early days of ACT UP, and you see people like in their early 20s storming the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, or throwing the ashes of their beloved, their dead friends over the fence of the White House. And this is really powerful stuff. So I like to tell these stories. And with Esther, it's going to be a lot of fun because it's both that story, but she also has this passion for dog agility. And I like to work with that. I like to work with the idea of agility, especially with an older person and with this history. So that's what I'm working on now. It's a feature.